What is up, everybody, and welcome to my ranking of the Hostel franchise, of which we have 3 films, and I have reviewed all 3 of them in full this past week. So please, if you want my more in-depth thoughts, I'll put cards up whenever I get to those individual movies. You can see my more in-depth thoughts on each of them. This is also done as kind of prep work and a bit of hype building for 31 on 31 Pain and Suffering that's going to release this Tuesday on October 31st, where me and the other members of Autop Stream get together, we choose a theme. This year was torture movies, and we rank all of those franchise films from worst to best. We got Hellraiser, Saw, Wrong Turn, and of course, Hostel. And on the off chance that watching the Hostel films gives you that bug to go get that European backpacking experience, you're gonna need a banking app that you can trust. So check out the sponsor of today's video, Dave. Are you even living life if you don't have financial issues or unexpected expenses come up out of nowhere? Especially if you're a homeowner or you own a vehicle, you know this all too well. Well, everyday situations like these is where Dave can help. Dave is the banking app that is leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check and no late fees. It's a part of Dave's extra cash account. Just advance the money that you need with no interest and then settle up later. Download Dave today at dave.com/Cody. That's dave.com/Cody. You could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less when you download Dave. No credit check, no late fees. Download the Dave app now or go to dave.com/Cody. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Backing services provided by Evolve, member FDIC. And thank you, Dave, for sponsoring today's video. So with that being said, guys, we will waste no time and go ahead and get into number 3. I wouldn't even say worst, because I actually like all 3 of these movies just fine. The least best of the Hostel films for me is going to be Hostel Part 3. Now, even though to me this is clearly the weakest of the trilogy, this was so much better than I thought it was going to be. This was the only one of these 3 movies that I had never seen before this week, and it was actually the only movie in this run of 31 films, save for the recently released Saw X, that I actually had to watch in preparation for this ranking. And the fact that I was never the biggest fan of the first 2 Hostel films, in a sense that I never really cared to rewatch them, and they weren't movies that I talked about or recommended to too many people, the fact that they went to a direct-to-video sequel that had no involvement from Eli Roth, all of that was just writing on the wall that this was going to be an absolute garbage movie. And it's not. It is significantly better than what you would expect from a direct-to-video horror sequel, and those are nice little surprises. It's not a great movie. It's not a horror classic by any means. There's a lot of issues here. But I appreciate the fact that narratively, they actually tried to do some things differently. They actually tried to implement some plot twists. I think that most of them were actually pulled off really well. They do a good job at not only with the narrative structure, but also the setting of Vegas and having Americans be involved in the elite hunting group and not just Slovakians, that it brings a little different dynamic to it and gives the movie a very different feel in the trilogy. And after the first 2 movies that, have a decent enough attempt at story, but primarily the focus of those experiences is shocking you, is shock value, is extreme amounts of gore, is sickening you. And the fact that this movie actually, because they inevitably toned down quite a bit of the violence and the gore, they actually tried to make you more focused on what they had to do with the story. I appreciated that change of pace. Now, the acting is just fine. There's a couple of people here that I like. You got Sunshine from Remember the Titans, who's really good as this kind of rich douchebag. You got Matt McNamara from Nip Tuck, who shockingly plays a pretty good, likable character after playing one of the most unlikable characters in TV history for, 7 seasons, 8 seasons, however many fucking seasons that show went on. About 3 too long. And the rest of the actors, they're fine. They're what you expect from a direct-to-video movie and not much worse than that. So I'll take that. I think that the one really interesting gore scene, the one really effective gore scene with the face peeling was effective and memorable. The rest of them were kind of throwaways, which that's a big knock for a Hostel film because the built-in fan base want to be sickened, they want to be grossed out, and they want to see some extreme amounts of gore. This is significantly tamer than the first 2. But while I can appreciate the effectiveness of how shocking those first 2 movies are, that also makes them not very rewatchable for me. They're not experiences that I want to re-experience very often, if not ever. And this movie, while being the weakest of the three, I would say is the most easy to rewatch. So if you're a Hostel fan and you were like me and just assumed the worst about this thing, give it a shot, because while it is far from a classic, it has way more going for it than I would have ever given it credit for. Now, my top two are basically at a razor's edge from each other. When I reviewed these movies, one of them got a 3, one of them got a 3.25, the other one got a 3.5. So as a trilogy, they're all pretty close in quality. But number 2 for me is going to be Hostel Part 2. And while I do think that the third act of this movie and the ending 10 minutes or so specifically is the most well-written and the most impactful and memorable segment of this entire trilogy, the other 2/3 of the movie I don't feel is as interesting or as engaging for me personally. I don't feel like the 3 girl leads are as interesting as characters. Not that the first film's characters is a very high bar, because it's not, but they're yet again kind of caricatures. You got the quieter girl who's got some mystery in her past. You have the very reserved, nerdy girl, and then you have kind of the very loud, whorish girl. And that's really all the development that their characters get for the most part, save for the lead actress in the last 5 to 7 minutes. And the other issue with that is that when you're watching a Hostel film where 3 wild but fairly innocent people are just lured into this horrific situation, and then you have to watch them slowly get tortured to death in a very gruesome and shocking way, it's not as easily digestible of an experience for me when it's 3 women. And that is the point of this. That is the reason they switched kind of sexes and they made it more of a female-driven film to shock you even further than the first film. But while I would not call the first film an enjoyable movie, I can get through that experience easier when it's a bunch of douchebags versus 3 women and they're being murdered by men. Something about that is too icky for me. And so I can get through it just fine. It's not like I'm emotionally triggered, but it makes the first 2/3 of this film much harder to get through than the first 2/3 of the first film, which is not easy by any means. Heather Matarazzo's death, in particular, is the most gut-wrenching thing in this entire franchise because of how sweet and innocent her character is, how brutal and how drawn out her death is, as well as just some of the acting, the performance that she brings across, to where it's not very audible, but every time I watch this, I could swear I hear her like panicking and calling out for her mom while she is being cut up to death, while somebody is bathing in her blood. Like, that's fucked up. Now, when you get past that, this movie is much more ambitious with the story than the first one, and I actually enjoy the fact that they do that they let you follow 2 of the people who are going to be clients of the elite hunting group, and you have the very loud chest-beating guy and the very nerdy, kind of more reserved guy, and they set up certain expectations with those personality types, and then they shatter those expectations in the third act in a very good way. The third act of this film is the best act of this entire franchise. And if the first 2/3 were a little easier for me to get through, this would no question be my number 1. But my number 1 is the original Hostel. And to be honest with you, it's specifically because of my experience watching it for the first time. Now, watching this movie today, it's not nearly as shocking or as gruesome as I remember it being, and that says a lot about how far we have gone as a society with our displays of violence in media, because holy fuck, the first time that I watched this, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like it was almost like a feverish feeling, to where I was walking out of the theater, me and my father feeling the same way, like we just paid to watch people get murdered in a little theater in front of us. Like we literally just saw a live person go through this, and now we're expected to go home and carry on with our lives. We were fucked up for the rest of that day. And I have never had a movie impact me the way that this did. And the fact that now you watch it, it's not that big of a deal, that's crazy. Like, we've had Terrifier, we've had the Saw films, we've had things like Game of Thrones and TV shows that are just built on extreme explosions of violence that we're so desensitized to something that Hostel seems tame now. That's fucking crazy. So I will always remember this movie for as long as I am on this earth because of how it impacted me and how it made me feel for damn near a full day when I first saw it. Never had another movie do that to me before or since. Beyond all of that, though, it's a just fine horror movie. This is not a franchise that has ever been one of my favorites, nor will it ever be. You have three douchebags that are overseas. They're backpacking through a bunch of different countries looking for a pussy. They're just trying to fuck as much as they possibly can, and that's basically the first act of the film. It is literally a porno. If any movie earns the moniker of torture porn. It's Hostel. And then very quickly they descend into a situation where one by one they start to get abducted and they are slowly tortured to death in very gruesome and very shocking ways with some really well done and gross practical effects. And what I always appreciate about this first movie is that slow building tension and that slow building mystery of what the hell is going on. Like, you know something is really bad and something is amiss, especially once you start to have the first character disappear and you get these ominous text messages and these pictures that don't look quite right, and then suddenly you start to see decapitated heads and these really grimy, wet, sticky sewer looking places, and you know shit's about to go down at some point. And when it finally does happen, it just continues to shock you with how far they go with the violence, how far they go with the gore, how far they go with the nastiness, people vomiting on themselves, eyeballs getting blowtorched out. And so while I'm somebody that I don't get a whole lot of value, or certainly don't get a whole lot of rewatch value out of those types of experiences, Eli Roth set out to make a film that is going to shock you with the violence and the gore. And for me personally, he 110% succeeded with that. So for what the Hostel experience was created to be, this one has always given me the most of that experience. And while it will never be one of my favorites, it's not a movie that I care to rewatch that often. I think I've only seen it twice since theaters in the last, 15 years? How long has it been? It's not one of those top grade horror films to me, but it has that very special place all the way charred into the back of my brain like a brand of a movie that I will never forget. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2023 new release reviews. I'm also going to stick my Saw review series up here as well as a playlist so that you can check out all of those in preparation for this 31 on 31 video. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the release of that video on the 31st. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but never backpack in Europe.